There is a moment in every missing persons case when investigators make a choice. They either keep looking or they stop. They file the case away in a cabinet. They tell the family there are no new leads. They move on to the next file, the next name, the next case number that is not going anywhere. And for the family left behind, time does not move. It does not file away. It sits there, in the chair, at the dinner table that nobody sits in anymore. In the bedroom that has not changed since the last morning, everything was normal. This is the story of a woman named Claire Alderton who went missing from a mid-sized American city in the spring of 2002. She was 31 years old. She had a daughter who was 6, a sister who spent 22 years driving the same routes, checking the same parks, taping the same faded flyers to telephone poles that had already seen 3 or 4 versions of the same photograph. And then one afternoon in September of 2024, a detective who was not even assigned to Claire's case glanced at a database entry while working a completely unrelated file and found her. 3 blocks from the house she disappeared from, living under a name that was not her own, in an apartment she had occupied for 19 years. What happened in those 22 years and why she never came home is one of the most complicated, disturbing, and ultimately deeply human stories I've ever had the opportunity to investigate. So before we go any further, I need to ask you to stay with this one, because nothing about this case is what it looks like from the outside. Claire Marie Alderton was born in the same city she would one day vanish from. She grew up in a working-class neighborhood on the east side of town, the younger of 2 sisters, in a household that by her friends' accounts was loving but complicated. Her father worked at a tool and die manufacturing plant. Her mother waitressed at 2 different diners for most of Claire's childhood. They were not wealthy. They were not connected. They were the kind of family that does not have lawyers on speed dial when things go wrong, and that matters a great deal to this story. By all accounts, Claire was bright. She finished high school with a B average despite working part-time at a supermarket for the last 2 years of school. She enrolled at the local community college and took business administration courses. She had ambitions. People who knew her said she talked about owning a small business one day, a bookstore, a cafe, something that was hers. She was practical about it. She saved money. She was not reckless. She was not impulsive. The people who knew her best have all said, in interviews and depositions over the years, that Claire was the kind of person who thought things through before she acted. In 1997, at the age of 26, Claire began a relationship with a man named Douglas Merritt. Doug was 5 years older. He had his own contracting business, small residential work, nothing glamorous but steady. He was charming in the way that people who are used to getting what they want can be charming. He was attentive at first. He remembered details. He showed up when he said he would. Claire's sister, Andrea, would later describe those early months of the relationship as the good version of Doug. The implication of that phrase tells you a great deal about what came after. By 1998, Claire and Doug were living together. By 1999, they had a daughter, Emma. By 2000, Claire had stopped taking college courses. By 2001, she had stopped seeing most of her friends on any regular basis. By the spring of 2002, her sister Andrea had not spoken to her in 4 months. Not because they had argued, but because Doug answered every call and always said Claire was unavailable. The isolation was so gradual that Andrea told investigators she did not fully recognize it as isolation until Claire was already gone. On the morning of March 14th, 2002, Doug Merritt called 911 to report that his partner had left the house the previous evening after an argument and had not returned. He said he was worried about her mental state. He said she had been struggling lately. He said she had left before, briefly, but always came back. The police took a report. They did not treat it as urgent. Claire Alderton was listed as a voluntary missing person, an adult who had chosen to leave. And that designation, that single administrative checkbox, would protect the real story of what happened to Claire for more than 2 decades. In 2002, the missing persons unit of the city's police department was understaffed and overwhelmed. This is not an excuse. It is a context. There were 4 detectives covering the entire city. Between them, they carried caseloads that any reasonable professional would describe as unmanageable. Missing adults, particularly women who police presumed had left voluntarily, sat at the bottom of the priority pile. Unless there was evidence of foul play, the standard protocol was to enter the name into the national database, file the report, and wait to see if the person turned up. The detective initially assigned to Claire's case was a 15-year veteran named Howard Gaines. Gaines would later give a deposition in which he acknowledged that he spent approximately 4 hours total on the initial investigation. He conducted 1 interview with Doug Merritt. He did not interview Claire's sister. He did not interview her neighbors. He did not pull Doug's phone records or financial accounts. He did not speak to Emma's pediatrician or daycare provider. He did not ask whether anyone had seen Claire leave the house or where she might have been going. He took Doug's account at face value. Doug told Howard Gaines that Claire had been depressed, that she had talked about wanting to start over somewhere new, that she sometimes had what he called episodes where she would be difficult to reach emotionally. None of these claims were verified. There were no mental health records consistent with what Doug described. Claire's doctor of 7 years later told investigators she had never been diagnosed with depression, had never been prescribed psychiatric medication, and had appeared healthy and clear-minded at her last visit 4 months before the disappearance. But Howard Gaines didn't know any of this because he did not ask. And Doug Merritt was careful. He was, as the investigators who reviewed the case 20 years later would note, strategically vague. He did not fabricate details that could be checked. He simply provided a narrative, a simple, sympathetic, uncomplicated narrative, and then stepped back and let the system's assumptions do the rest of the work for him. 6 weeks after Claire's disappearance, Emma was placed with Claire's sister Andrea because Doug said he could not manage working and caring for a toddler alone. This would prove to be the only decent thing Doug Merritt did in this entire story. For 22 years, Claire Alderton did not contact her daughter. She did not contact her sister. She did not attend her father's funeral in 2011 or her mother's in 2017. She did not send a birthday card. She did not log into an old email account or leave any trace on social media. She did not appear to exist anywhere on the grid that connected the life she had left behind. Andrea Alderton, Claire's sister, spent those 22 years doing what the formal system had stopped doing almost immediately. She hired private investigators twice. once in 2005 and once in 2012, and both exhausted their retainer fees without finding anything actionable. She submitted updated inquiries to the National Missing Persons Database every year. She maintained a website for 11 years. She drove the same route through the neighborhood every week, on Saturdays, in the same car. Because she once read in an article that missing people sometimes return to familiar routes. Emma grew up knowing that her mother had gone away and never come back. Andrea raised her with honesty. She told Emma what she knew, which was that her mother had disappeared and no one was sure why or where. She did not tell Emma what she privately suspected about Doug, because she had no proof, and because Emma occasionally asked to see her father, and Andrea did not want to poison that relationship on the basis of a suspicion. Doug, for his part, was peripheral. He paid child support irregularly. He visited Emma 4 or 5 times in the first decade of her life. By the time Emma was a teenager, he had largely faded from her life, which Emma, in retrospect, has said was a relief. In 2018, the detective who had originally handled Claire's case, Howard Gaines, retired. Before clearing out his desk, he handed a physical case file to a younger detective named Sonia Reyes, with a note that said simply, "One I've thought about." Detective Reyes had 63 active cases. She set Claire Alderton's file in a drawer, but she did not forget it. In August of 2024, Detective Sonia Reyes was running a routine cross-reference check on identity documents flagged in a fraud investigation, a completely separate case involving a ring of fake Social Security applications in the county. The cross-reference tool she was using was a recent addition to the department's digital infrastructure, a system that could compare flagged identity documents against missing persons databases with a speed and accuracy that older methods simply could not match. The tool flagged a document, a driver's license issued in 2005 to a woman named Carol Ashford, at an address 3 blocks from the street Claire Alderton had disappeared from. And the license photo showed a woman in her mid-30s. The Social Security number on the license had been issued to a deceased infant in the early 1980s, a classic ghosting technique, where someone assumes the identity of a person who died young and was never assigned a full adult record trail. The flag was automatically generated because the SSN had been flagged in 2 previous audits as potentially fraudulent. Detective Reyes pulled the file on Carol Ashford. She looked at the photograph. She looked at a photograph she had pinned to the inside of a manila folder in her drawer. A photograph of Claire Alderton, taken at a family gathering in 2001. The photographs were 23 years apart, but the face was the same. The eyes were the same. The shape of the jaw and the particular way the subject tilted her head slightly to the right in both photographs was the same. Detective Reyes did not go to the apartment immediately. She conducted 3 weeks of surveillance. She confirmed through building records that Carol Ashford had rented her current apartment since 2005. She confirmed through utility records that the apartment had been continuously occupied. She pulled the broader identity trail. Bank account opened in 2006. Part-time administrative work at a series of small local businesses. A public library card. A gym membership. A quiet, nearly invisible life, lived in careful smallness, 3 blocks from the house she had left. On a Wednesday morning in September 2024, Detective Reyes knocked on the door of apartment 4C. The woman who answered was 53 years old. She looked at the detective's badge. She did not run. She did not deny anything. She said very quietly, "I knew someone would come eventually." The interview between Detective Reyes and the woman who had lived as Carol Ashford for 19 years lasted 7 hours. What follows is the account that has been made available through the subsequent legal proceedings, the civil case, and extensive interviews conducted by the investigative journalist who broke this story publicly in late 2024. On the night of March 13th, 2002, Doug Merritt did not simply argue with Claire Alderton. He attacked her. The attack was severe enough that Claire believed in the immediate aftermath that she was going to die. She had been injured before. The relationship had been physically violent for nearly 2 years. But this night was different. This night, she said she felt what she described as a shift in him. It was like something turned off behind his eyes, she told Detective Reyes. And I understood in that moment that if I called the police, he would tell them I had done something. And I would have an apartment and a lawyer I couldn't afford, and a daughter I might lose, and a man who was going to find me again as soon as the police were done with him. Claire had, over the preceding months, been quietly researching. She had found information online about the ghost identity technique. She had saved a small amount of cash, $3,400, in an account Doug did not know about. She had a bag packed in the storage unit at her workplace. She had a plan, and it was the plan of a woman who was not fleeing impulsively, but who had been preparing for the moment she believed was coming. The attack on the night of the 13th was the moment she decided that moment had arrived. She walked to the storage unit. She retrieved the bag. She took the bus to a city 40 minutes away. She spent 2 nights in a motel, then began the process of becoming Carol Ashford. She spent a year in that city working cash-in-hand jobs, building a paper trail under the new identity. Then, in 2005, she made the decision that seems on the surface inexplicable. She came back. She rented an apartment 3 blocks from the house she had fled. And she stayed. "I needed to be near Emma," she told Detective Reyes. "I couldn't reach her. I couldn't explain without destroying everything, but I couldn't be far away either." 3 blocks was as close as I could safely get. For 19 years, she watched her daughter grow up from a careful distance. She saw Emma in the neighborhood sometimes. She watched her from across the street on a day Emma graduated from high school, wearing her cap and gown, walking with Andrea to a waiting car. She did not approach. She did not speak. She wept, she said, for 3 hours after in her apartment, alone. Doug Merritt was arrested in November 2024, 22 years after Claire disappeared, on charges that included domestic violence, obstruction of a missing persons investigation, and filing a fraudulent police report. The arrest came after Claire, who had by this point been working with a victim's advocacy attorney provided by the state, agreed to give a formal statement. And the statement was corroborated by 3 neighbors from the original neighborhood who had suspected violence in the home, but had never been interviewed by Howard Gaines in 2002. One neighbor, a retired school teacher named Patricia Wallace, told investigators she had heard Claire screaming through the wall on multiple occasions in the 18 months before the disappearance. She had called a non-emergency line once. She had been told it was a domestic matter and that officers would conduct a wellness check. No wellness check had ever been conducted. Patricia Wallace had assumed the family had moved away and tried not to think about it. When detectives contacted her in 2024, she cried for most of the interview, she later told a journalist. "I should have pushed harder," she said. "I knew something was wrong and I'd let myself believe it wasn't my business." Doug Merritt's defense team argued that Claire had left voluntarily and that the entire 22 years of silence was evidence that she had not, in fact, been in danger. The defense argued that a truly scared woman would have gone to a shelter, called a hotline, involved law enforcement. This argument, which is unfortunately common in domestic violence defense cases, was dismantled by the prosecution's expert witnesses, who explained in detail how domestic abuse survivors reason about their own safety and why conventional escape routes often feel more dangerous than self-designed ones, particularly when the abuser has a persuasive public persona and the survivor has no financial resources. Doug Merritt was convicted in March 2025 on 2 of the 3 charges. He was sentenced to 4 years, with the possibility of parole at 2. The sentence, many observers noted, was not commensurate with 22 years of a woman's life lived in hiding. Claire Alderton's attorney made the same observation publicly and is pursuing additional civil litigation. The reunion between Claire and Emma Alderton did not happen the way reunions in films happen. There was no running across a room, no immediate tearful embrace. Emma, who was 28 years old when her mother was found, had spent 22 years processing an absence she had been told might be permanent. She had done therapy. She had built a life. She had a job she was good at and friends she trusted and a version of herself that had been constructed carefully and deliberately in the space where a mother was supposed to be. Emma has spoken publicly once in a written statement released through her Aunt Andrea's attorney. The statement said, "I do not yet know what having a mother means. I did not have one for 22 years, and the person I am was formed in that absence. What I know is that my mother made choices I do not fully understand and may never fully understand, and that she also survived something that should not have happened to her, and that both of these things are true at the same time. I am not ready to have a relationship. I am not refusing one. I am taking the time I need to figure out who we are to each other. That is all I know how to say right now." Andrea Alderton, who drove those Saturday routes for more than 2 decades, did see her sister again. The 2 women met in a mediator's office in the fall of 2024. Andrea has not spoken publicly about what was said in that room. In an interview with a local newspaper published in early 2025, she said only, "She was wearing the same color she always wore." That sounds like a small thing. It was the biggest thing. Claire Alderton's story sits at the intersection of multiple systemic failures. A domestic violence response system that did not intervene before she reached her breaking point. A missing persons investigation that accepted one man's account as the entire truth. And a legal structure that provided so little protection for survivors that a woman calculated hiding as safer than seeking help. These are not abstract failures. They have names, they have addresses, they have case numbers. But the thing that stays with me, after spending weeks with the documents and testimony that make up this case, is Claire's choice to return to within 3 blocks of the life she had left. Every expert in domestic violence I consulted, every survivor advocate, every therapist who has worked with victims of long-term intimate partner abuse, said the same thing when I described this detail. It is not surprising. The bond between a parent and a child does not follow the logic of safety calculations. It does not respond to the sensible argument that distance is protection. Claire Alderton was not a woman who had stopped loving her daughter. She was a woman who had measured every single day for 19 years. The distance between what keeping Emma safe required and what it cost her to maintain that distance. That calculation is not one most of us will ever have to make. But understanding it, really understanding it, changes the way we see not just this case, but every case where a survivor's choices look, from the outside, like something other than survival. If this case raised questions for you about domestic violence resources, missing persons reporting, or survivor support, I will have links in the description below to organizations that do this work. Thank you for spending this time with Claire's story. It deserves to be told, and told completely.